All right, hello and a very warm welcome for those of you who are joining us on the very first edition of TCM Sports Huddle. And for the next 1 hour or so, I will be your host, Nikhil Naz. And the topic that we're discussing is how is the sports industry gearing up post-lockdown? Now, if you are like me, a sport nut who's been missing live sporting action for the last 2 months or so and are having withdrawal symptoms, well, I'll tell you what, there's some good news around the corner, all thanks to the latest advisory that's been issued by the Ministry of Home Affairs, in which they say that you could have action in the stadium provided that there are no crowds turning up. How does that pan out in the next few months or so? That's what we'll try and discuss. And I've got various questions for the six eminent panelists that join me, from when can we realistically see sporting activities resume, to how and with what modified conditions will sport be played again, and how will those modifications affect the sporting ecosystem. How will also the sponsors and broadcasters deal with the new scenarios? What innovation planning in the interim? All these questions that I have for my panelists, let me quickly introduce them to you. I'll start with Rahul Johri, who's the CEO of BCCI, the richest and one of the most influential sporting bodies in the world. Anupam Goswami joins us. He's the league commissioner Pro Kabaddi Mashal Sports, a homegrown and indigenous sporting entity that's broken many stereotypes and is today one of the most watched leagues in the country. Anil Jairaj joins us. He's the Executive Vice President Sales, Star Sports, a media giant that needs no introduction. They own rights to some of the biggest sporting events, not just nationally, but internationally too. Nikhil Arora, my namesake, with me. He's the MD GoDaddy India, one of cricket's biggest sponsors. They are also the official partners at the last year's ICC Cricket World Cup. Sudhanshu Gupta joining us. He's the COO of Paytm First Games. It's a gaming platform that's been raking in the numbers recently. What's been their success mantra? We'll try and find that out as well. And last but not the least, it's the man who's behind this show, who's helped me organize all of this, Lokesh Sharma, the MD of TCM, a man synonymous with sports marketing in India. He's looked after the commercial interests of some of the biggest corporates and top athletes in the last 4 decades or so. So without further ado, and I won't beat around the bush, Anupam, I'll come straight to you with the most pertinent question that every sport fan wants an answer to. How and when are you planning to host the next season of Pro Kabaddi?
So I can I can attempt an answer to the how part. I mean, there are two main considerations. One, we have to definitely sustain the engagement and great excitement that Pro Kabaddi means for its fans, both the hardcore Kabaddi fan as well as the common sports person. So we, of course, this engagement and this connect and this these bonds will be primarily strengthened on screens this time. I mean, there is general advisory that you talked of right now, that we are headed for an era of spectacular sport, and to see how long that is to be sustained. For immediately, we are going to work like many other sports represented in this session also. Whether primarily we'll offer high value engagement on the digital screen as well as on the television screen.
Okay.
As part of that, what we are going to do is we are going to continue the story of Pro Kabaddi story of the discovery of a great world-class contact sport from India, which is Kabaddi. And there lies the nub of the second aspect. We are a contact sport. So there is guidance emerging for some sports across the world. There is virtually none and absolutely none for contact sport. And the issue there is exacerbated by two of strengths of Pro Kabaddi. We are a long league. We have the highest number of matches and contests for any front-ranking league in India. So 93 days, nearly 200 matches. It's a great exhibition of contact sport and prowess at physicality. The first thing we'll have to go for is, I think the league will have to go for a very comprehensive COVID safety protocol for the event and for the personnel, including athletes involved there. And we will take advice from and guidance from the Government of India. We will talk to all the stakeholders, including franchises, and others. And then I think it's what all leagues will also have to engage with is to redesign, and reformat their conduct of competition to ensure that the safety protocols and procedures are implemented. That would the way I would go for.
Right, right. I'll get into the nitty gritties of the things that you mentioned a little later, Anupam. But similar question to you, Rahul. Since I asked Anupam about when does Pro Kabaddi League starts now, I referred to those MHA guidelines right at the start of the program. I know it's impossible to assign a date for you at the moment, but can we expect now with these new guidelines in place, IPL 13 to take place sooner rather than later? Rahul, that was for you. Okay.
Can you hear
I'll
me
just
now?
check again. Hi. Yeah, now we can hear you. I think your mic may have been muted. Yeah, if you could
Yeah.
just start from the beginning, please.
So our approach is, keep watching the situation. We are going to be guided by the government of India in its entirety. Whatever other government guidelines is what we will follow. And we don't want to get ahead of ourselves on anything. And that is why, if you've seen the BCCI advisory, it says
Right.
that cricket is suspended till further notice. And by that we mean that we are engaging with a lot of the agencies on a continuous basis. Now, what is going to happen? The other part that is going to happen is, that the lockdown is there till the 31st of May. And after that, we
Right.
get into monsoon season. And cricketing activity in earnest can start practically only after the monsoon season. And that is a window which should probably give us, hopefully things will improve and will get us, give us more variables which we can control and accordingly take a decision.
Right. Okay. Just to let our viewers know, Sudhanshu is still not with us. We're trying to fix. May have been a technical issue on his front, but we'll try and see when we can get him onto the discussion. But for the moment, Nikhil, I'll come to you. This is something that Anupam said right at the start, that they're in a sense gearing up for digital engagement and television engagement for the audience and gearing themselves up for having no crowds in the stadium. But how does it affect a sponsor? And I say that with regards to you do a lot of on-ground activities. Other than that, you've got passes for your regular customers as well as clients that you entertain at the stadium. With no crowds around, how is it going to affect you as a sponsor?
Thanks, Nikhil, and thanks for having me on the panel. I think just looking at just the magnitude of what it does, right, from a sponsor perspective, it's cricket itself alone is kind of a $2 billion industry or more. With majority of it, 2/3 coming out of India, right? Globally, I'm talking about, which is both what India posts and maybe 1/3 of what India takes abroad in terms of revenue. And out of that, about 75% of that revenue is from broadcasting media, and the rest is ticketing and hospitality. So we're talking about that 75%, which is a big part of, as a sponsor. I think the way we are looking at it, clearly, we love to engage and participate because sports is unifier. It's a common denominator. And especially in this time, it will bring people together and, motivate and inspire, because if you look back at the history, this is one place, this is one ecosystem, which is, the best use case for us to kind of get through this crisis. That being said, I think, how sponsorships were being measured previously, right, which was brand impressions, visibility, how much kind of audience would I get? I think we're looking at a little different lens to say, okay, is the sports not only going to be about sports, but is it going to be a purpose-driven sports, right? Even when it comes back into the stadiums, even if it's without fans, for us to evaluate the returns, we're looking at commercial returns and we're also looking at community returns, which is like, people in today's environment would want to see both, right? So I think empty stadium is fine as far as we look at the brand, because ultimately, 75-80% is from media and broadcasting. But how the sport is played, and I just want to give one example, right? I mean, in the historical terms, all sports are being played for both excitement, fun, and commercial. I think now we have to add an element of social, right? And sports comes together, for example, in an empty stadium, are able to raise the money we need today to help a lot of stuff which is going on, right? I think that element will attract a brand, because brand is not looking at commercial partnership, but also, societal community giving back sponsorship. So I think empty stadium is not that much of a worry. I think there are digital ways to, bring it out, because most of the engagement does happen digitally and socially. But how it's going to be played, and how the teams are going to show up and how they're going to give back, as an ecosystem to what is needed, I think will be important consideration for the brands to go with which league and which team.
Okay, I'll just take that forward to Lokesh, to you, to what Nikhil mentions. 70-80% he's looking at, social engagement and digital engagement. And it's that probably about roughly 20% that really, the emphasis on in terms of crowds at the stadium. But do you think that 20% for sponsors at large would be a deal breaker?
No, I don't think so. This will open up more avenues. People will get into more into digital engagement, and the crowds are not going to be away forever from the grounds. It is a very temporary measure. So we need to roll out the show also at some point of time and build the safety processes and put a protocol into place to get the sport going, because we just can't be sitting still. And very recently I saw something very interesting. There was a Christie's auction. On the auction, they were selling, virtual encounters with Hillary Clinton, with athletes, and the virtual encounters were that, you got a half an hour with the celebrity in a virtual world, and it was a virtual coffee. So both people are having coffee, but except they're on the other sides of the screen. So, and it was hugely popular, and people really, because at the end of the day, they want a personal experience. Suppose if it is a fan, I'm just talking off the cuff because I had not thought through this, but even if it is a fan who has to be presented a trophy by, or there is an engagement which he has with a star of the match, you can still arrange it for him for the time being. So it is not as if that element cannot be brought in. And another thing which people have been looking at is, to get the fans into the stadium for the purpose of television through a virtual technology.
Yeah.
So, if you have you have access, you're watching the game, you want to, I'll tell you a very brief story. When cricket in the early stages in India, there was a protocol that no match will be televised live in the city where the game was being played.
Right. Yeah.
Because the ticket revenue was lost out, and the cricket associations were not willing to take that loss, because the fans would not come to the ground if it was available on television. In early 90s, when the television coverage was taken away from Doordarshan, so what was done at that time was that the fan was made part of the picture. So then the fan started going to the ground to become a part of the live picture. So here also, we need to figure out a way of sending the fan virtually to the grounds. And in fact, if I remember correctly, during the 2011 World Cup in Mumbai, Star did a promotion where you had to log into a platform and you could actually get yourself photographed sitting in the stadium and be part of the whole picture. So it's, I think we need to, the problems always make us think of solutions and make it perhaps more interesting. So the sponsors cannot stop because of this one little restriction. And let me tell you, sports brings the community together. It raises passion and zest for life. So, the moment any kind of active sport is starting, there'll be so many people who will be watching it. Just imagine if there is a lockdown situation. People like Anil Jairaj, Anupam, they used to struggle that, okay, no, it should be played at this time, because that is the time when our key viewership will be here. But now when there is a lockdown, it's you've got a locked in viewership. So more people will be watching. Just imagine if you have a big cricket game today, your TRP will be in the range of 20, because there are people sitting at home and they want to see something real which is happening and which people are doing. Because here, two things are happening. Either people are watching television programs where they are short of telling you that you're the next person about to die or be taken to the hospital. So, which is very depressing. Or you keep seeing old content. So sports is going to make a huge difference. So, no fans in the ground, no problem. Find a solution to make the picture more attractive.
Okay, interesting. You talk about virtual encounters. I mean, we're having a virtual webinar of sorts,
Yeah.
and under normal circumstances, I'd probably be sitting in a studio and have all of you physically present with me. But we're doing it and we're discussing it online at the moment, be it digitally. But I'll take that thing that Lokesh points out to you, Anil, and he's talking about that 2011 World Cup where Star was innovating. I read somewhere that Star's thinking of innovating even further with no crowds in the stadium. Are you thinking along those lines? And if you could share some of those innovations that you may be working on.
I think, as a couple of sort of panelists have said before, the primary thing we need to worry about at the moment, more than live sport or stadium with spectators or something, is actually the state of health and safety, and that is the single most important thing. Now, having said that, these are exceptional times, and we will certainly follow all guidelines by the ministries and various sporting bodies. Because there are quite a few experiments that are happening around the world, including Bundesliga started over the last weekend where they played without spectators. So there are models that are evolving. Some of the innovations that Lokesh spoke of are some of the things that we've also tried in sports like Premier Kabaddi League, where we've tried to do things in stadia, which you can do things which do bring the game to life significantly. For instance, use of some virtual reality things and things like that. But I think fundamentally, I'd like to reiterate what most people have been saying, that some things will change. Look, but a lot of things won't change. At least, if I were a betting man, I would bet that the power of sport to inspire people won't change. The memories that sports create will not change, and hence we've got to do things that will enable that. But of course, primarily we have to sort of get through this phase when safety, health of every individual involved with sport or outside has to be solved before we can sort of get ahead of ourselves.
All right, let me take a question to Sudhanshu. I think who's on the other end of the spectrum from all of us, because he is part of a platform that's actually enjoying more and more viewership and more engagement at the moment. So Sudhanshu, if you could tell us, we're hearing there's a spurt in mobile gaming from various published reports. Could you throw some light on the subject?
Sure. Nikhil, first of all, thanks for having me, and sorry for being a little late. That it's undoubtedly true that gaming definitely has seen a increase in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And if you just look at it logically, a lot of entertainment avenues for people have either shut down or paused, and that includes sports, that includes going to movies, that includes going to malls, even for on the weekend. So it gives people a lot of time and not too many options, and which is why gaming has come up as one good alternative where people are spending more of their time in just entertaining themselves. Like games like Ludo have become really popular as well. Now, of course, this is so gaming also includes fantasy sports, which is directly, I would say, linked with a live cricket match happening. So while that has obviously taken a hit, but the various other alternatives have definitely picked up. And I think, as the lockdown eases as we go along, the overall affinity to gaming would probably still become more of a habit for people, because you've tried something for 6 to 8 weeks, and that's a good enough time to develop new habits, right? So that's broadly how gaming has performed.
All right, that's an interesting perspective there. Just one thing, Anil, I come back to you because of the point that Lokesh made, and I wanted your reaction on that. With the corporate world, taking a major hit due to the lockdown, consumer behavior expected to change, and spending power seems to be affected. How do you see that impacting your ad revenue as such, as far as when the sport resumes?
So I think the future will be the future. We really can't see much into it. But my own sense is, historically, as in just before this whole COVID sort of pandemic hit us, uh, sport has always delivered disproportionately for sponsors, and I don't mean only broadcast. It could be on digital, it could be on ground sponsorship. Anybody who's associated with sport has seen disproportionate results, because it's and just before, we had possibly the biggest year in sport ever. And if I could just tell you a few things, it was the biggest IPL ever in terms of viewership,
Okay.
not only on TV but on digital also. So it's one of those things which has grown on both, right? An extremely successful World Cup, some of the highest ever ratings for any cricket bilateral that we've seen, and even sports like kabaddi had a really good year, as would niche sports like Premier League or ISL. ISL actually grew viewership by 50%, Premier League by 100%. So it was all doing very well. And compared to any other genre, sport delivers disproportionately. And I think most sponsors will make a lot more active choices when it comes to sport, versus spending their money anywhere else. Because if I had the if I'm short of budget, I'm more likely to put it in places where I'm rather sure that my money will give me the bang for the buck. So
Okay.
I think when this all ends, and that is a when. When this all
Right.
ends, we think it'll be very good for sport, Nikhil.
Okay, sport you think could be that platform where a sponsor would like to spend. But let me get a sponsor's perspective. Nikhil, do you, as a sponsor, do you find yourself in a catch-22 sort of a situation? Because on one hand, every company seems to have taken some sort of financial hit during the lockdown. But on the other hand, you need some sort of advertising budgets to, get your businesses back on track. So how do you see this playing out in the coming months?
Yeah, so we always looked at the good thing is we are on the right side of the uncertainty right now, being
Yeah.
the company people's online. So in that sense, it is a good time in terms of for us to help the small businesses really go from physical to digital. We've always looked at sport partnerships very differently, because normally if you think of a brand, we either look at either it's going to increase my brand awareness or it's going to give me performance, right? And brand awareness is most helpful when you're early stage of your life cycle. People don't know you. You invest money in sports, and you absolutely get great returns, as Anand was saying, right? Because there's no level of viewership like in sports. If you evaluate from a performance point of view, which is, hey, does it translate into more customers, more revenue? It's always, it depends on the league, it depends on the sport and so on. But we always look at more it as a customer engagement platform, because, it is the best way to engage customers and best way to engage employees, because it basically, brings them together. And so I think the only difference I would say we would do now is to say, okay, if it's purely a brand investment, we would like to look at commercially a little more closely, because times are different then and times are different now. So in terms of return on brand investment would be a little more, I would say, carefully done. And performance-wise, we never betted on like this is going to increase our business. So I think you will see, I think in my sense, even brands like us who are on the right side of this crisis, be a little more cautious of what to spend. The spend won't go away, but what to spend and how to spend. And that's why I can't over amplify the importance of purpose in sports, right? Because brands will closely watch that if the leagues and the teams and the players, how they're going to get involved with this kind of public-private partnership model, which I say today, right? Because there is a crisis, and sports has the power to really generate a lot of funds for this crisis. And any brand will jump in, not just for commercial purposes, but bringing more, like I would say, kind of fundraising to the current crisis, right? Because Bollywood is doing it, sports has done it, but as a sponsor, I'll say, hey, this team is now going to commit 20% of its revenues to this particular community or this particular cause. That would get me more excited in addition to the sports.
Okay, well, taking a look at various aspects. One, as we mentioned, we may be looking at sport without any crowds coming in. The other could be, international travel, and how is that going to affect, the foreign players coming and playing the leagues? Anupam, I'll take that question to you because you briefly mentioned at the start, getting up for Pro Kabaddi in the post-lockdown or post-COVID situation. If we reach there with the travel restriction in place, and I'm guessing international travel restriction will stay much longer, how do you see that impact the participation of quite a few foreign players that you have in your league?
So I think one of the big strengths of Pro Kabaddi has been the participation of overseas players. It just shows that Kabaddi, while very Indian in origin, is also emerging as an international sport. But two things there. We will comply with all government advisories and permissions on travel from overseas and including overseas players. Second, the safety of the players will be of overseas players will be as important to the league as the safety of domestic players. So we will insist that they comply and adhere to the whatever safety protocol and practices we come up with. That will be
Okay.
the point of view of the league.
Okay, Rahul, to you, similarly, taking a look at the IPL, you're looking at if and when that happens, as you're saying, you're waiting for the government's instructions and advisories. But are you also looking at a scenario that you may have a very domestic setup in the IPL?
No, I don't think that the flavor of the IPL is that the best players around the world come and play over here. And so, like Anupam said, everyone's committed to maintaining that flavor. And of course, it is going to be a step-by-step process. So we don't, you cannot expect normalization tomorrow.
Right.
The IPL is one of the greatest engagers. I mean, Anil was mentioning some numbers just now. More people watched the IPL last year than they voted for the Indian general election. So that is the kind of numbers
Right.
that are involved over there. And, but I feel from a sponsor front, sports and in India, cricket is the leader. So cricket has, as a leader, will and should lead the way. And the recovery will be, if there is something sharper than a V-shaped recovery, that is what it will be. But at the same time, we need to wait for the situation to normalize. We need to wait for the overall environment to become conducive. We need to factor in what the government advisories will be. You never know. I mean, tomorrow, if everybody coming in, right now there are no flights. At some point,
Right.
flights open and everybody needs to quarantine themselves before playing. That what is the impact of quarantine requirements globally on sport? How will that impact the schedules? Because as it is, the schedules are extremely tight. But if just imagine if you add 14 days prior quarantine, prior to you starting practice also, what impact that
Yeah.
has on schedules. So there are a lot of moving parts, and one has to look into each one of them. But having said that, like I said, we stay optimistic. Hopefully, the situation post the monsoon will improve, and we'll approach it then at that point in time.
Okay, another follow up on that, Rahul, because as you're saying, there are a lot of moving parts in this, and everything that we discussed at the moment would only be conjecture. But could you also be staring at a scenario because, whenever cricket resumes, as and when that happens, personal safety is also a criteria you need to look at. Could you be looking at a scenario where some players or individual players fearing for their own safety may then take a decision that I don't want to be playing at the moment? And would you be sensitive to that as BCCI if an individual player was to decide that?
Well, safety of every player, every individual, and not just the players. In a match that happens, even if you were doing a match without any spectators, there are a huge amount of crews, there are camera people, there are ground staff, there are a lot of people involved. Safety of every individual is of paramount importance, and every individual has the right to decide on their safety, and one should respect that.
Okay, just going forward, Lokesh, I'll come to you on this one. I mean, in the medium to long term, since you have rights to a few international boards, as I know, do you think we will see travel of huge fans from India to overseas location that may just stop, which has been a key driver for sports tourism?
You see, travel of fans is not going to happen very quickly because people would need some time to build their confidence about traveling. So that doesn't happen, in the near future. So for that, people would have to wait for a medicine to be into the market where it's like a Tamiflu which you take and your flu is gone, or
Yeah.
there is a vaccine in place. So neither of them are happening. So the travel of the fans is a challenge, but the teams would have to start traveling differently. For instance, I know like West Indies is going to England to play a series, and they are planning to charter a flight and take them to London. So you fly private, take them there, put them into safe zones. So in fact, there's a very interesting thing where even at the hotels where they are going to be staying, they are creating three teams of people looking after the teams, be it from F&B, housekeeping. So there'll be red, green, yellow teams. So each team works for an 8-hour shift. So if anybody falls ill in that team, then that whole team goes off. So people would find solutions, they will plan things, they will do it differently. Because, like there have been so many catastrophes in human existence. So we always find a way, and we must do it safely. And we know what the enemy is capable of doing. We've seen, people have seen what the virus is doing. So we need to find adequate, response to that. So it'll take unusual measures.
Okay, Sudhanshu, for you, if you had to take any unusual measures, that may not happen now, that may happen in the post-COVID era, as and when we reach there. How would you plan to sustain the interest in mobile gaming in the post-COVID era?
Well, Nikhil, that's a very interesting question, and something that we keep discussing as well. Because as lockdown 4.0 is also happening across the country, and some people are getting back to regular life, we are seeing obviously some of that dip come in, and it of course, as I mentioned earlier, while it is a habit forming time that we've sort of gone through, and hence we hope that a lot of these users will sustain. We as gaming platforms and companies will also have to continue to, I would say, innovate and add content. So for example, so let's just take an example of how, let's say, people have gotten used to playing Ludo, right? Now, how do you sort of make sure that even when people get back to normalcy, or in whatever way that normalcy will be, but when people do get back to that, then how does still gaming stay a part of their life? So something like maybe a weekend Ludo tournament, which is going to happen. So one is that. One is on the innovation and content front, that a lot of us as gaming companies will try to innovate on. The second thing also is, as sports opens up and fantasy sports also picks up again. I saw Anil and Lokesh also speak a lot about how all of us have to change and innovate. Right now, while obviously fantasy has always been a sort of like a play along. So while you're watching a match, you engage with the fantasy game as well. I think with a lot of matches becoming spectatorless, at least in the beginning, and with a lot of things moving to virtual, it also opens doors for fantasy games and fantasy apps to become a lot more than just becoming fantasy games, right? I mean, if there's a lot of content which is going to be just streamed online, then why not have a part of that content streaming within the fantasy app as well? So, even as games, we will have to definitely innovate, want to sustain and even grow on the interest and momentum that we have gained in the last few weeks. And also, secondly, as sports comes back, how do we also make fantasy sports even more engaging, especially when it's spectatorless?
Interesting. Anil, most of your target audience, the sport nuts, they may be involved in what Sudhanshu is doing at the moment, playing virtual sport as such. Would you then agree with that school of thought, and that this is something that Lokesh alluded to as well, that as soon as live sport resumes, there will be this spurt in demand? Those fans who've been hungry are just going to come and be watching live sport, and then you might just see viewership go through the roof more than the general elections, as you mentioned earlier.
Sorry, I didn't mention the general elections, but I did say that the viewership grew quite dramatically. So all the indications that we see are around that, Nikhil. To be honest, even now, if you were to pick up any of the social media feed, you will see that live sports is being missed quite a lot. You'll see people are doing various things, participating in quizzes, etc. Sport conversations are at an all-time high. In fact, some of the nostalgia games that we ran, which included past ICC tournaments, past BCCI games, etc., seem to be watched by certainly a much larger audience than what we've seen. So we do believe that when live sport comes back, there will be a significant spurt in demand. We do think that the viewership as it is was quite high, but will be a lot more, because that's what happens generally when people have been deprived for a point of time. And we think quite importantly, it'll be both on television as well as digital platforms. And the reason for that is people have also got used to watching large number of hours of television today, right? Since the lockdown, actually television viewership, even with obviously without live sport, has gone up significantly. So we do believe that consumption across screens will grow, and each individual screen will grow quite dramatically.
Just looking at that post-COVID era, Lokesh, to you on that,
Yeah, Nikhil, in fact, I wanted to come and say something
sure,
before you ask me this question.
Please.
You see, if you see, we keep talking about return of normalcy. So I think one of the biggest expressions of returning to normalcy would be the conduct of sports. The sheer joy of kicking a ball or hitting a ball is an expression of freedom, that you are a free person. So which is why if you see the governments, like in UK, the British Prime Minister, he was one of the first supporters of resuming EPL. Now, Bundesliga has started. It has started with great support from the government, because it shows that, look, we are normal. We are not under any threat. We are going to survive. So it is an expression of freedom. In fact, if you look at Bundesliga, the viewership of the last match was 600,000 compared to normally 13,000. So, like, there is viewership is increasing. So, it's a signal which is sent out that, yes, we are ready. And if you see, the Indian government also, they've said, okay, we open up the stadiums for training. So that's a first step. That, okay, the athletes, you get back to the play field. So, to start a resumption of sports is a barometer of normalcy of life.
Interesting perspective. Nikhil, would you agree? Sport plays a major role in the near future, especially with regards to, help lift the spirits of a world that finds itself in an unprecedented situation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is no better kind of unifier in the world than sports, right? Because it cross languages, cross borders, cross any nation, right? So in that sense, it's and if you look at all the inflection point in the history of every nation, right? Sports has defined how people have emerged from those crises, right? So in that sense, it would be. Though I don't want to add a couple of points, Nikhil, though I know my esteemed is going to be thinking about it. So we're talking about the top of the pyramid right now, right? The IPL and all the, kind of the top end leagues. I think it's important to also be conscious of what's going to happen downstream, right? And even from a sponsor point of view, because, we have gotten involved in grassroots sports also, like running, or you may take, even like, at the college level or under 19 and so on. And I know BCCI does a great job in kind of engaging that, right? I think that's one to watch out also, because in the first burst of whatever the new normal would be, the consumers and spectators will be right going for the top of the pyramid. So we want to make sure the bottom of the pyramid, even from sponsors' point of view, is taken care of, because that's what, looks at the, produces the output for the future. And secondly, I think on the players per se, right? My view is that players would need some retraining to play in empty stadiums. Because obviously it is a more of a mental adjustment for them to come out and play in empty stadiums. So, do they feel the same energy? And not everybody will adapt easily, right? So, efforts from the sports ecosystem would need to be put in for them to be used to that. Because, as LeBron James had made a statement that I will never play in an empty basketball stadium ever. Now obviously he's realized that's going to be the reality, right? So I think to think on those lines for the ecosystem would be very important.
Well, I've personally been speaking to a few sports people in a few webinars before this, and at the moment, most of them are so hungry to get back onto the field that they would, take anything, be it, stadiums without crowds for the moment. But the other point that you raised, Nikhil, and I'll take that question to the two concerned people on our panel, in Rahul and Anupam. Anupam, maybe you can answer that first. How do you take a look at, people at the lower rung of the sport? How is it that you look after them during these testing times?
So I think what will be important is we understand the power. We understand the power of sport. We have experienced it. We continue to have that belief in the power of sport. Sport unifies. Sports vindicates. Sports takes you to triumphs. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that we are in the midst of a very unprecedented situation, which has also affected people in diverse ways. So I think what we have to do is to, with great humility, great sensitivity, use sport as an opportunity to evoke the triumph of the human will in this country. And that would obviously, as Nikhil Arora pointed out, it will mean, spanning the entire spectrum of sport from the elite sport to grassroots sports. Again, an area there will be to spread the message that sport should be conducted with responsibility and commitment and with safety. So those essentials will be operative across the spectrum of sport. That will be at the heart of all resumption, revival, and growth of sport.
Okay, Rahul, to you, and I've been speaking to a few cricketers myself, and while you speak to top level cricketers, most of them have been worried about sort of non-contracted players that rely just on domestic cricket, and they rely on the money that's given to the respective state boards. How is the BCCI planning to look after those set of players?
Well, it's a great point that Nikhil brought out, but domestic cricket is the bedrock of Indian cricket. And what people don't realize is we conduct over 2,000 games in a 6-month season of domestic cricket. Now, that maybe in today's world, in this changing scenario, the scheduling of domestic cricket needs to be completely relooked at. Because today there is a team which can travel 50 kilometers to play a match or 3,000 kilometers to play a match. And because everybody plays every other team home and away. Now, in this scenario, where travel is restricted, where players' safety, support staff safety is of paramount importance, how do you conduct these leagues? How does one look at it? So it is a discussion that will be had, and interesting options will need to come up. Innovation will be the key in this.
Okay, let's look at the larger picture. Lokesh, coming to you now. We keep talking, and I'm moving away from cricket now, just looking at other sports, because cricket doesn't really rely on government funding. Let's take a look at most other sports that rely on government fundings at the moment. Now, in the post-COVID world, or even post the lockdown, where governments may be busy dealing with bigger economic challenges, and hence, sport might just take a back seat in the scheme of things for them. Would you like to see private entities come forward and play a larger role in the development of a sport rather than just being mere sponsors?
You see, the private entities have come and supported. You look at a sport like kabaddi, you look at sports like badminton, you look at sports like hockey. There's already so much of corporate support which has come the way of these sports, and always the corporates also, they feel very delighted to support any sport where they see the country winning. So, India has done very well in all these sports. So, badminton, we've thrown up so many of these ladies who are doing so well on the international circuit, both Sindhu and Saina. Then you look at kabaddi. Kabaddi, we've done very well. Hockey, we've moved up the ladder. So, I'm sure that they will come and support the other sports also. And India, if you see historically, you will see that sports is also an expression of nationalistic supremacy. If you see economies, the developed economies always did much better. Like US was doing very well in sports because there was more money available.
Yeah.
It also was an expression of the strength of their nation. The East Bloc countries in the early 70s and 60s, the communist world, they prepared athletes because they wanted to show that their ideology was superior. So, it's India is a developing economy and it is a growing economy. So Indian athletes will continue to get all the support that they need because as long as the nation is growing, the economy is growing. You can see the example of China also. China returned to the Asian Games fold in 1978. By 82, they were almost there. 86, they overtook Japan, if I remember correctly. By 90, they'd taken everybody out. So, it's the economic growth and sports supremacy go hand in hand.
Do you, Anil, see that sentiment exist even now amongst your private partners that come on board, sponsoring a sport, that it's not just all about messaging and marketing, that they see some sort of responsibility to be associated with a sport? And do you see that increasing as a sense of responsibility going forward in this post-COVID era?
I think, Nikhil, it's fair to say that anybody who comes in, apart from as a sponsor on sport, apart from the commercial gain that they're looking at, which is performance delivery for their business, also do it because there is a great joy in supporting the nation at sport or your particular city at sport. So almost everybody that we know, not only as I say broadcast or say on digital platforms, but even on ground, that is really true. So that does happen. I mean, again, I'll just hazard a guess to say that yes, immediately in the post-COVID time, in line with what Nikhil Arora was saying, I do think we'll see a lot more of people coming ahead because it is the right thing to do, and even the weightage of expectation on doing the right thing will possibly go up. So I do think yes. My answer would be yes, Nikhil.
Okay, interesting. And in most of the literature that I've been reading at the moment, Sudhanshu, coming to you on this one, one thing that's mentioned a lot at the moment is e-gaming. That may be the future, all the more now, during the lockdown phase. So do you eventually see people in India considering professional gaming now as a career option? I think, okay, I don't think we have the connection with Sudhanshu. I'll try and get back to him. I mean, that's a question I could throw to Anil as well. He's part of a sporting entity. Is Star at any point seemingly interested in esports, e-gaming? Is that a sector that you're looking at?
So at any point of time, Nikhil, as a broadcaster, we look at various options as a sport broadcaster. Amongst a lot of things that we're looking at, yes, why not? If that is going to be a way in which you can engage audiences, yes, we will certainly look at all options that come up, including esports.
Okay. Finally, and this is something that we personally as journalists discuss a lot, and I'll take that question to Rahul and Anupam. We're roughly just got 5 minutes left on our discussion. We keep talking about, and I'm going back to the no crowd situation. We keep talking about gate money. Is that a major factor? I mean, or is it just something that we look from the outside and give it a lot of importance? Does it really not contribute to the economy of sport, or is it a major factor? Anupam, to you first.
Look, kabaddi is a strong indoor sport, and pro kabaddi is entirely indoor. And it will be tempting to say that gate revenues for most indoor stadia in the country are negligible. But also the economies and the business models of indoor sports in India are such that relatively modest amount of money mean a lot to their franchises. So, and there are some very successful indoor venues which offer a fair return to franchises based out of there. So gate monies are, if not the most significant, they are important. At the same time, going forward, for us, public safety is going to be the paramount importance, and any government guideline to public safety would be adhered to. And of course, the challenge would be to create a great spectacle uh, with what we have and offer great engagement nonetheless. That would be our challenge.
Rahul, what about you? And I know this is a question best answered by IPL franchise owners, but I'm sure you must be in constant discussion with them. What do you say about gate money, people not coming to the stadium? Is it a cause of worry for IPL teams?
I think that's a broad, it's not just IPL, but also the international cricket, more so the international cricket that we play. And gate money, albeit is a smaller percentage of our overall revenues, but it's extremely important because bulk of it goes into the maintenance and upkeep of stadiums. And, infrastructure needs to be kept, ready and in good health, for which gate money is an important criteria. However, in the short term, as we get back to normalcy, it's something that one can live without. But ultimately, it's an important piece. It's an important piece ultimately.
Okay. Finally, I'll have the last word to Lokesh. Lokesh, just sum this up for us and just tell us, how do you see the sports revenue and advertising market now in the sports universe really play out in the post-COVID era?
See, in the ongoing year, obviously the revenues are going to be less because that is the case with every aspect of economy. People are locked down. A first quarter has gone by without any sales. There is, people are struggling. So all production activity has come to an end. So this year is obviously going to be a very poor year compared to the previous years. And the way to go about it would be, all the sports bodies will have to prioritize that if they've lost, say, 4 months or 5 months in their calendar year, they'll have to start, thinking in terms of taking some activities out of their calendar, because you can't fit in all the activities which you were supposed to do in 12 months in 6 months or 7 months or 5 months. So it is not going to happen like that. So it's the response of sports sponsorships, sports revenues is going to be pretty much similar to what is happening with the rest of the economy. So it's not as if that this is going to buck the trend completely.
Just a word on that calendar, since you make that point, Lokesh. I'll take that to Rahul. Rahul, I know the cricket calendar has been disrupted, as is other sports as well. How are you looking at a situation once cricket resumes? Are we looking at a situation, again, it's a matter of conjecture, where we might have multiple series happening at the same time, something that's already been suggested in the media?
If you see the current cricket calendar, international cricket calendar till 23 World Cup is all signed and sealed. But of course, now with this kind of a situation with cricket not happening, that's going to be impacted. So it's not for any one board or entity to be able to solve that. At the ICC level, all boards have to sit down, rework their calendar, and then move forward. It's going to be a collaborative effort.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. We're completely out of time. In Rahul Johri, Nikhil Arora, Anil Jayaraj, Lokesh Sharma, and Anupam Goswami. And all of you, thanks for joining us online. You were watching the huddle on the TCM Sports India platform. If you have any comments, do put in there. I thoroughly enjoyed that session as a sport nut myself. The only criticism, if I may have, and that is sent to me by one of my colleagues, is that why is it that you have a all-male panel? Why didn't you have a woman there? So a female colleague of mine has that message. We'll take a look at that next time around when we do a webinar of such magnitude. But thanks again, gentlemen, for joining us. And you are watching the Sports Huddle on TCM Sports India. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.